Hello and welcome to Jason Live. My name is Patrick Shea. We're back once again with our STEM career series where we learn about careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. And today, exploration and writing from role models currently working in those fields. Today's role model is Lorie Karnath. She is an explorer, an author, and philanthropist. Lorie has traveled the world in the name of science, exploration, and education. And when she's not off exploring exotic locations, she's written books, launched foundations, worked in the financial industry, and has also been president of the Explorers Club. We're going to learn much, much more about Lorie's many career pursuits and accomplishments in just a moment. But before we do, I want to remind everybody out there that today's event is live and interactive. We are going to ask you to participate in our polls. You can also send us questions for today's guest. To do so, just use the box just below the live video window. We're going to try to get as many of you involved as possible today. But right now, it's time to get Lorie involved. Welcome, Lorie. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. So I have to admit, you are the first person that we've had on this event that we have given the title of strictly explorer, and author in your case as well. We've had many scientists who also explore, but nobody who could just say, I am an explorer. How does one get the title of explorer?
Well, I'm not sure that it should be given to me more than anyone else. I think that we all are explorers because we all want to learn about new things. So I very much appreciate the title. It's certainly an honor. From a very young age, I've been very curious about the world and have had a lot of questions. And I think one of the best ways to answer your questions is to go out there and find the answers. And oftentimes this involves travel to remote locations.
We've got a lot of questions that have already come in from our audience. We're going to take the first one right now. This one's from Nicole. She wants to know, when you explore, do you ever look for anything in particular?
Yes, oftentimes, especially my early days in exploration were particularly related to flora and fauna studies. So you're very much looking specifically for particular animals, plants, and or looking at new areas where you're not sure what you're going to find, but specifically relative to the certain areas. One study I did in the Borneo jungles related to bat studies. So that was a very specific animal type study. So it really varies depending where you are, but generally there is a specific goal in mind. However, with exploration, oftentimes you find something else that you don't expect to find, and that's part of the excitement of the discovery process.
So do you think those days are more exciting than finding what you were actually looking for?
It's hard to say. I'd say that both are exciting.
Very cool. We've got a video question coming in on the same topic. Let's see what he has to say.
What kind of explorer are you?
What kind of explorer are you, he wants to know.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, especially early on, I was mostly involved in flora and fauna studies for different museums and different organizations. But as time has gone on, I've become much more involved in humanitarian pursuits. Because I think as you learn about the world, you learn about where there are countries other than the U.S. where sometimes education is a bit behind, or other options that people might have in their lives are not as plentiful as they are here in the United States. So one of the things I've been very involved in is trying to bring education, in particular scientific education, to remote areas around the world. And these efforts have been mainly concentrated in Burma and also China, mainly Yunnan province. Both of these areas are and have been very remote. And for some of these areas, they don't even have schools. So we've been in the process of building some. Other places, they require supplies. So we've brought supplies to different schools. Sometimes this involves river navigation. So it's not easy delivery, let's say.
And we've actually got some pictures here of some of the schools that you've worked with in Burma. What are we seeing in these images?
These are some of the classrooms. This is a school just outside Yangon that some friends founded and we've been supporting. This is one day we went there and we started teaching them about recycling because plastics and things have only recently come to the school. This is their English class. They're all starting to learn English. And in this picture, I might point out, you can see windows on both sides of the school, and that's because electricity is still very varied in Burma. It's not reliable. So to light the classrooms, you need the windows. Mm-hmm. And that one of the other pictures you saw is an orphanage where some new children that were joining the orphanage where they will live and get some education were sleeping their first day at the school. And then the last picture where you saw the kids doing exercises, that was along the Chinwin River where we went and brought them some supplies for their school.
So I know for some of the folks who have read the responses that you wrote to the questionnaire, they might know a lot of the places that you've been to in your travels and explorations. We've got a couple of questions here, perhaps for folks who didn't get a chance to read that. They're interested in where did your travels take place? So here's a question: where was the most memorable place you have traveled? And another question: what's the coolest place you have gone to? So can you give us a sense of where have you traveled? Where all have you explored?
Question 2 as one of the most memorable and also literally the coolest would be Antarctica. And that was a place that when it took me several tries to eventually get there, but when I finally did, to see just immense expanses of white crystals glistening in the sun is a sight that I will never forget. There was nothing so beautiful, and even though it was incredibly cold, it reminded you why you explore, just to see the beauty that's out there.
Okay, we're going to go to our next video question. This one's from Jessica.
What's it like being an author?
I'm not sure if you caught that. She wants to know, what's it like being an author?
Well, I always knew that I was going to be a writer. I always hoped I would be. I grew up in a place called Concord, Massachusetts, where a lot of the early naturalist writers lived, and I read their books early on. And so I combined my interest in writing and love for the outdoors like they did, and started first writing stories and articles, and then eventually started writing books. And these my books often related to my desire to try to foster the messages of science. One of the books I wrote was a children's book written with Professor Gustav Born, who he is the son of Max Born, the Nobel laureate who helped start quantum physics. And Gustav and I listened to the questions his granddaughter was asking, and we decided to answer those questions in simple scientific terms, because science is like a language. The earlier you start, the easier it is to learn, and easier it is to remember later on.
Our next question here, we can combine a couple of the things that we've been talking about. This is from Sydney. How do you do 2 jobs at the same time? Do you explore writing, or do you write about exploring?
I do both. But I think everyone is capable of doing many things at the same time. But for me, I've been able to meld 2 passions together. Exploration has something I've always done from a very young age, and it's similarly writing, and even better that I can go to some of these locations and write about them or learn from them and use what I've learned later on in my writing. There's 5 words that I live by as an explorer, and they're explore, discover, share, preserve, sustain. So the explore and discover, we've covered a little bit of that today, but I think one of the most important parts is actually share. And so what I try to do is wherever I go to share what I've seen and learned with as many people as I can. And oftentimes the book can be part of that effort.
Well, we really appreciate you being here today to share with us. We've got more questions coming in. This next one's from Noah. He wants to know, how often do you go out to explore?
Well, in a way, I could say that I'm exploring every day, as I think most of your audience is too. Every day we wake up and we have new experiences and challenges and questions. And oftentimes, some of the greatest exploration can be in your own backyard. One expedition that I undertook was following the paths of the European white stork from Northern Europe down to Africa and back. And the reason why I did that was to show the challenges that these birds face along their migration route, but also to teach people that right in their own backyards, animals that they perhaps see every day actually are undertaking immense journeys. And if they ask the right questions, they can learn amazing amounts of information just from what they see in their own backyard.
Speaking of questions, we've got more coming in. This one's from Zoe and Alana.
How can you handle both jobs at the same time, and which one is your favorite?
Both jobs, when I go on an expedition or when I'm someplace different or remote, I'm oftentimes taking notes, taking pictures, speaking with people, learning about the country, learning about the environment. And later on, I will have to take a period where I am just sitting and writing generally. So there's always, you have to make time for both, but most of my information and a lot of my research is done in the field.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Jesse.
What place on earth have you been to the most?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
He wants to know, what place on earth have you been to the most?
That's tough. I have to say the country I probably visited the most times is China. In some ways, I know that country even better than the United States. But one of the places that I've also visited many, many times is Burma. It's been one of my favorite countries, and I've been watching the transitions very closely that they're undergoing now.
We have some more images here from one of your trips to Burma. What are we seeing in these shots?
Well, this is a novice monk initiation ceremony. While in Burma, this last trip I was on where we navigated the Chinwin River, we sponsored 3 novice monks. And this is the boys arriving at the monastery. They're dressed to represent their worldly goods, and they arrive at the monastery where their hair is shaven and they're given robes. And while they're there, they are supposed to give up all goods and materials. And they go into the monastery for a period, and they are taught about many things. In fact, for centuries in Burma, the monasteries have been one of the best places where boys could go and get an education. So while they're there, they have excellent teaching. Now that Burma is opening up, more and more schools are coming in, but especially in these remote areas like there, this is one of the best venues for learning.
So I understand that Burma, in years past, was actually a pretty difficult place to travel as an outsider. How did you overcome those difficulties?
Well, I lived in Hong Kong for several years, and so Burma was not so far away, and I had met several Burmese, and that made it a lot easier. Still today, there are certain regions that have opened up, but there are still many areas that are not so easily, one is not so easily able to travel to. However, I know the country well enough now that I'm able to.
Excellent. We've got our next question coming in from Brielle.
Aren't you so tired of traveling? Sometimes you just want to pass out?
Love that question. Is it exhausting to do all this travel and exploration?
I think that for the type of thing that I get to do, it's extremely invigorating. I think oftentimes when you have the kind of job where you do something similar every day, that perhaps gets tiring. I don't know. I haven't really done that. But when you're able to travel like I am and learn something new every day, you never get tired.
Okay, we've got our next question now from Cheyenne.
What do you like best about your job?
I like best about learning about people from around the world, their different cultures, their traditions, and also it's extremely hopeful to see how many talented, intelligent people there are all over the world, whether or not they've had a chance for a good education or not. It's just very inspiring.
We've got a text question here from Jonathan. He wants to know, what's your favorite subject in science and what do you like to write about?
I have a pretty wide interest in science. I am helping with a group called Molecular Frontiers, of which I was one of the founding members. And we create symposia around the world on topics that we're especially interested in, that we think students will be interested in. This one you're showing now just happened recently in Korea, and it was on this discovery process, how to foster originality and creativity, which of course is part of exploration, but very much part of science, whether it's in the field or in the laboratory. So there are, I'm interested in all sorts of topics, and luckily have been in a position where I can go out and seek answers and learn more about those topics. And I think that's very important when there is something you want to learn about, to ask the questions and find ways to get the information.
We're going to actually switch gears a little bit and go back in time. We're going to talk about your career path, what things started you off when you were young, and what path you followed to get to where you are today. We actually have 2 video questions that I'm going to play back to back that will get us started in that direction. So here they are. This first one's from Isaiah and Zach, and then we'll have Ariel.
Who inspired you? What's your inspiration?
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, and that is where Thoreau and Emerson and a number of the early naturalists lived and worked, and I had the chance to read their writings early on, and as well as see the locations that they wrote about. And that got me very excited about exploring and learning more about the natural world. Later on, I started reading about women explorers in particular and some of the challenges that they had to face, and that inspired me even more. So I have a number of mentors out in the exploration world and also the scientific world, and I've been very inspired by their discovery and their desire to discover.
So Rachel wants to know, how old were you? What age did you start to take an interest in science?
Very young. I would say probably about 6 or 7 is when I already started working on experiments in my backyard and going out into the fields and looking at different animal species that were around my area. I had parents that liked to travel, so I got opportunities with them as well. So a very early age. I think as soon as you ask a question, you're already involved in science.
Mm-hmm. So clearly from reading your questionnaire answers, our viewers out there know that you moved to Europe at a very young age. And we have a couple questions here. They've noticed that you listed a lot of schools in your profile page. Josh wants to know, what's it like going to so many schools? And CRG asks, why did you attend so many?
It was mostly because I lived in different countries, and some of the schools that are listed are actually middle school and high school. So it wasn't just transferring school to school, but I also, some of the schools were related to art history and architecture, which is another one of my passions. restoring old homes is something I'm very involved in. So some of those schools had to do with that. And then, I learned French along the way. So part of it was to continue practicing my French.
Very cool. Our next question is from Tanya. She wants to know, was where you work now or what you do now, was this your childhood goal?
More or less. I always knew that I wanted to write, and I always knew that I wanted to explore. The third thing I always wanted to do, and unfortunately I haven't managed, is I wanted to write, explore, and learn Gaelic, or Irish as it's called. I've learned some other languages, but so far haven't accomplished the third.
I hear Gaelic is pretty challenging.
Indeed it is.
Yeah. So what languages do you speak?
Well, French and proficient in German and Spanish.
We actually had a language-related question that came in from Shannon. She wants to know, do you have to study the native languages before you go exploring?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I always think that it's really important to know at least a few words of the country's language where you will be traveling to. You can't expect people to speak your language, and you should learn to communicate and at least show that you're making that effort. So I've even learned a few words in Burmese, which is a very beautiful language. For example, hello is Mingalaba. And
it's a very respectful thing to do,
yes, I think so.
Be able to speak at least a little bit when you're in that country. We are going to switch gears once again. We've asked you a lot of questions, and now it's time to turn it around and have some poll questions that Lorie has come up with about herself. So we're going to take a look at the first one of those right now. We've talked a little bit about this. Not sure if we have all of the answers out there in the program just yet, but the first poll question is, what countries has Lorie lived in? Is it A, Spain and France? Is it B, Germany and Belgium? Is it C, United States and China? Or is it D, all of the above? We are going to give folks out there just a few seconds to submit their answers and take a peek at the responses coming in. So far, we've got 90% claiming that you have lived in all of those places. They're voting for D. 8% think it's U.S. and China. They heard you mention Hong Kong, possibly. 6% think Germany and Belgium. So we're starting to get a little bit of a mix of everything, but at the moment, 75% think that the answer is all of the above. Lorie, what's the correct answer here?
It is D, all of the above.
And some of that you mentioned was from traveling with your parents when you were young, and then
Yes.
what brought you to the other countries later in your life?
Well, I was early on. My parents moved to Belgium, and of course we accompanied them. And later on, going to school in France and some other countries. Currently, I live in Germany and the U.S. One of the reasons I do live in Germany is because most of my publishers for my books are German publishers, and they're really excellent publishers. So I like to be in the vicinity. And Hong Kong was, we haven't mentioned this, but my early career was in finance and investment banking, which I always related it to the life sciences. And that was part of the way that I got to learn so much about science and lived in Hong Kong for a period.
We should come back around on that once we're done with our polls, but I'm going to jump to poll number 2 right now. Where did Lorie help establish a nature sanctuary for storks? Was it A, Africa, B, the Middle East, or C, Northern Europe? And I can say, if you've been paying attention out there, I believe Lorie provided the answer to this earlier in the program. So we're going to give you just a few seconds to submit the answer. We'll see if you're paying attention. So far, 75% are saying Northern Europe, with just a few votes for the other two answers. Those percentages seem to be holding. Lorie, what is the correct answer?
We have a very smart audience because indeed it was Northern Europe. And if I could just mention something about this sanctuary, the area was a very small peninsula in Western Germany that sort of went a little bit into the eastern part. And so as a result, during the time that the wall existed, nobody ever touched that area. So it's very abundant with wildlife, and one of the reasons why the storks go there. Now, to establish this sanctuary, you had to go through several districts along the River Elbe because we wanted to provide water and food for the storks while they were in their breeding season. It was very difficult to negotiate for the land needed, but what ended up happening was a very interesting solution, which I think is one of the most ecological solutions you could hope for. And that is the farmers needed the land during certain parts of the year for their cows to graze, but not during the wet season when the storks needed it. So we negotiated a program where the 2 months that the storks need food, they can use the land and it can be flooded if there's not enough moisture, and the rest of the year the farmers use it. So it ended up being a win-win situation for everyone.
It's great when it works out that way. How long did it take to get to that point?
Quite a while.
I bet.
But we managed.
Yeah. Let's go to poll number 3. Which topic does Lorie enjoy writing about the most? Is it A, art history, B, recipes, C, mechanics, or D, science and exploration? I think we're going to probably jump to the answer pretty quickly here once we get a few of the responses in, because I think our audience out there might know 100%. No, 80% right now think it's science and exploration. 10%, well, less than 10% now think mechanics. Lorie, what's the correct answer?
It's actually science and exploration. I do enjoy writing about art history as well, but science and exploration by far is my most current topic.
Okay, we'll go to the last poll question here. Lorie was the second woman in history to do something. What was it? Was it A, she was the second woman in history to climb Mount Kinabalu? Hope I'm pronouncing that right, Lorie. Was it B, serve as president of the Explorers Club? C, live in the Borneo jungle? D, teach English class in Burma? Or E, 2 of the above answers are correct? Guess it doesn't matter which 2 in this case, but if you think might be multiple answers there that she was the second woman in history to do. Let's see, we've got answers coming in. Many people out there, about 80% think that 2 of the answers are correct. Did we throw them off the path with that option? Lorie, what's the correct answer?
Well, I've done all of the above. The only one that I know for sure I was the second woman was as the president of the Explorers Club. So in the 109-year history, I'm the second woman to have served as president.
That's quite an honor. So very cool. So what was that like being president of the Explorers Club?
The Explorers Club combined a lot of my passions together. It's an old institution in a very old building that needed much restoration, and it has chapters around the world. So it's a combination of people, explorers and scientists from different parts of the world and cultures and involved in different activities, along with the need to restore an old building, which I undertook and accomplished a big part of it. So it was a great platform, a great scientific platform from which I've been able to launch some of these other new activities.
We're going to talk about the future right now, and we're going to get into that right here with a question from Emily from Central Pennsylvania. She wants to know, what's the one thing that is on your bucket list that you have not completed that you really, really want to do?
Okay, well, I don't want to go into too many details, but at one point in my life, I got a very severe tropical illness in one of my journeys. And so I had a good amount of time to contemplate my bucket list, and I made that bucket list, and I completed my bucket list. So now I look at everything that I do as a bonus. So I'm on a bonus list.
Very cool.
But one of my future projects, which was not on my bucket list, but I think it's still a very exciting thing, And I'm actually taking today to announce it because it's not going to be officially announced until early next year. But I, along with a man named Tim Lavery, are starting a museum in Ireland called the Explorers Museum. And it's going to be housed in a very beautiful castle. There's an image right there. It's about an hour outside of Dublin. This castle was chosen because it was the residence of a man named Howard Bury, and he was an early explorer. He was the first to do a recce trip to Mount Everest, and he opened the gates so that there's Tim Lavery right there, so that others could follow. And it was 22 years later or so when Hillary made it to the top of Everest. But he was a very famous explorer who is forgotten. And if you go back to my 5 words about explore, discover, share, preserve, sustain, this goes to the sharing, preserve, and sustaining. And I think it's very important that we don't forget these people that have opened new worlds for us at every level, past, present, and future. And so I think we found a very good home to be able to start preserving and remembering not just past explorers, but for all of the future ones. And I'm sure there's many among your audience who someday we may be celebrating in the William Morris Room in this beautiful castle.
One of those may be Harrison, who asks our next question here. What areas need to be explored the most, in your opinion?
Well, we still have lots of exploring to do on this planet, let alone beyond this planet. But many people have asked me, is everything known? Is exploration over on the Earth? Well, not at all. Very little of the ocean has been explored. And most of the land that has been covered has been explored in ways that can be re-explored now because of new technologies and new scientific tools that we have. So whatever we learn today will change tomorrow as we become technologically more proficient. Also, as you know, we experience climate changes often, which on its own engenders new changes that, again, we need to study and contemplate and understand what they mean. So we have lots of exploring to do on this planet, and we're learning more and more about space as well. So there are plenty of opportunities for explorers.
So there's some great advice for future explorers out there. Jonathan is looking for advice for an aspiring author. What advice or suggestions can you give him?
Well, I think what you need to do is, this is actually advice that was given to me, is don't try to write about what you think people want to read. Write about your passions, and if you're passionate enough about what you're writing about, people will want to read it.
Okay, we've got another question coming in here. We've just got a couple minutes left. So this one's from Emily. You said you've met many famous professionals. Who is your favorite person you met, and what did they inspire in you?
There are so many amazing people that I've met around the world. But one I'd like to mention right now, because it's particularly timely, is my time that I met Nelson Mandela, who was, I think, one of the world's most amazing people. He taught me about what it means to be free. When I asked him about freedom, he said, well, you can't understand what it means to be free because you've never been not free. And that gave for me a whole new definition of what freedom is.
Pretty amazing stuff. We have time for just one last question here. This one is from Sydney.
What is your favorite thing to do when you're not working?
Well, there are lots of things. I mentioned that I'm very interested in old home and building restoration. In fact, where I'm speaking to you from now is an arts and crafts home that I helped restore along the Hudson River. I have a very old farmhouse in France that was basically a pile of rubble, which is now a beautiful little 400-year-old farmhouse. I had my chance to work on the Explorers Club building. I'm always exploring. I have several new trips coming up, and these include one to Morocco, one to Mongolia. I'm going to be going out to Alberta, Canada, where I worked on a dinosaur dig later this summer. So a number of exploration journeys. And, even though writing is my work, I'm always writing as my hobby also. And I'm also always thinking of new ideas for conferences and symposia. So with my work with Molecular Frontiers, we have one coming up on the brain in Stockholm in May, and then we're planning one on resources, in particular water, in Singapore next year.
Sounds like you've got plenty to keep you busy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We really appreciate you taking the time today, Lorie. Before we go, I know that your latest book is just about to hit the bookshelves. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this book is called Architecture in Burma. It actually describes the history of Burma through its architecture. Their history has been a long and difficult one, but the architecture bears testimony to much of the very good things that happened in Burma and some of the not so good things. So that is out now, and I'm going to be doing a few book signings, and it's a country I love and people I love, so I'm very excited about this project.
And yet another example of you combining your many interests into one project: the writing, the photography, the travel, and architecture in this case.
Yes.
Very cool. Once again, thank you for taking the time today. We talked a lot about what has inspired you along the way, but I'm sure that you are equally an inspiration to others out there, including our Jason Live audience and myself. So really great to have a chance to talk to you today and learn more about your amazing career.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate having had the opportunity.
Okay. That is all for today. It's also all for 2013. We don't have any more events before the end of the year, but we'll be back in January. We'll be announcing our January through June season just after the new year. So until then, I want to wish everybody out there a very happy holiday, a wonderful new year, and we'll see you again in 2014. That's it for today. I'm Patrick Shea for Jason Learning. Take care, and we'll see you again next time.